What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to another tier list ranking video. And today we're going to be talking about horror cliches and horror tropes. Now, if you are not familiar with those terms, essentially what a horror trope, or at least a script writing trope is an overused element in a story or a script writing trick to make a movie work, whether it is convenience that is laid at the killer's feet or an intentionally stupid thing to make the protagonist be put into peril more often than not, to create hardships that wouldn't realistically be there to make the movie last the 90-minute plus runtime, things like that. And more often than not, they're very overused. Most of these, if not all of these, is going to piss one of you off whenever they are in a movie. I have a ton of these to discuss. There's probably a multitude more that I haven't even remembered or have not decided to put into this list that we could talk about, but that's what's going to make today's video a little interesting. Where a lot of the other rankings and the tier lists, I try to lean more into celebrating them and talking about the ones that I love while acknowledging the ones that I don't. This is a list where we're going to be sifting through a whole bunch of things that a lot of people, horror fans predominantly, are sick of, that they hate, that they do not enjoy about horror films, and trying to figure out which ones we actually like and which ones just need to go away forever. Anyway, with that being said, I have a whole ton of these. This is going to be probably the biggest tier list ranking that I've done yet, maybe aside from the Saw Traps ranking. We've got 15, 30, 45, 60... What is it? 69 horror cliches and horror tropes to discuss today. Oh boy, we're off to the races already. And the tiers that I'm going to be placing them in from worst to best is going to be Let It Die, the ones that I am absolutely sick of seeing that will automatically put a negative and a stain on my movie experience if they show up in that film. Just above that, we've got Lazy Bullshit, which are ones that don't necessarily infuriate me, but are certainly riding that line of being ones that I'm sick of seeing and are more often than not done very well. You have All Tolerate It, which are the ones that are middle of the road. If they're there, I'm not exactly happy about it, but I'm not unhappy about it either. It's just, it is what it is. This Could Be Fun, which are ones that are certainly tropes and cliches for a reason and can be overused because of that, but more often than not, they can be used in a way to add a fun little flavor to the movie. And then I Need It, which are horror tropes or cliches that I think are just a part of the DNA. They're a part of the recipe. They're a part of the experience. And if they're not there somewhere, I'll actually miss their absence. Now, this list of horror cliches and tropes are pretty hard to avoid and protect yourself from while watching our beloved horror films, but one thing that you can avoid and protect yourself from is having all of your personal information out there available on the internet for people to snatch up by using the sponsor of today's video, Aura. Have you ever Googled yourself and been shocked to find out the amount of personal information that's just readily available for anybody to find? I did this just a couple of days ago, and within about 4 clicks, not only did I find all of my current information, but all of my old addresses and phone numbers over the last 10 to 15 years, which is pretty much everything that somebody needs to steal your identity. The unfortunate reality is that there are data brokers out there that make an absolute killing selling all of your personal information to robocallers, spammers, or anybody willing to pay for any of your information. Your full name, your email, your home address, your phone number, your health records, all of your relatives' information, it's all out there. Well, luckily the sponsor of today's video, Aura, is here to help by identifying these data brokers that are leaking all of your personal information and even submitting opt-out requests on your behalf. Legally, these data brokers do have to delete your information if you request it, but they make it extremely difficult for you to do so. So just let Aura do all the heavy lifting for you. Recently, AT&T revealed that over 73 million customer records, both existing and former, were released onto the dark web. They recommended that everybody affected use strong passwords, monitor account activity, and even consider credit freezes and fraud alerts. Well, Aura can do all of this for you in one easy-to-use app. No need to download a bunch of different apps or sign up for multiple services just because a company couldn't secure your personal information. I value my privacy and I value yours, so go to aura.com/Cody Leach or click the link in the video description to start your 2 2-week free trial today. And thank you so much to Aura for sponsoring today's video. And now it's time to kick this bitch off and get started, everybody. Now, Tier Maker automatically has sorted all of these into alphabetical order, so we're just going to stick with that order. And I'll also put a link down below in the video description for this tier list if you want to do your own and tag me on social media. Please do that. I love seeing your guys' list. But we're going to start off with addict recovery. And this is a trope where it could be one of two things. Either you have a character in the movie that is basically their caricature. They are an addict that is all you get to know about them. That's their entire personality. Or the more commonplace use of this trope is that you have a character, and it's usually the main protagonist, that they're an addict or an alcoholic, or they have some form of addiction, and their trials and tribulations going through this horror scenario miraculously leads them to recovery. The only movie I can think of that has done this well is the Evil Dead 2013 film, so it's not one that I'm particularly a fan of, but it's not commonplace enough for me to really hate it either, so that's going to be our first entry into I'll Tolerate It. Now, next we have alpha male fights, and prime example is going to be the picture that I actually used for this, which is Jason and the boxer character from Jason Takes Manhattan. And this is where at some point, predominantly in the third act, you have the big alpha male character that decides to take a stand and decides to go fist to fist with the slasher killer, and it never really works out for them. I actually enjoy this one. This one's going to be in This Could Be Fun. I have yet to think of an example where it actually works out. The worst example being Halloween Resurrection. That's the only one I can think of where it works out for that character, but it sure as shit didn't work out for us as the viewers. But I always like it when you get somebody that decides they ain't taking this shit no more, and they're tired of running, they're tired of fucking tripping over things and dropping weapons, and they're going to kick the shit out of this masked killer. And you can have some fun comedic relief with how that inevitably goes down. Next, we have angsty teen. And look, this is just a personal thing. This goes right into Let It Die for me. I hate the trope, especially when it's like a horror film that's focused on a family, like they move into a haunted house or some shit, and inevitably you have the teenage character that is always a little fucker. Whether it is a girl or a boy, they're always in that moody fucking, the world revolves around me, pissing and moaning, I don't get my way bullshit. And it never bothered me until I was a father, until I was literally dealing with that situation at home. And so now when I see a character like that, I automatically go into parenting mode. I just want to like warp into the TV like Poltergeist and just do some drive-by parenting on that little bastard. But yeah, it never really works out for me. They try to do it to create drama within the family, and then by the end of the film, them going through this horrific situation is going to bring them together by the end. It's just lazy, it's overdone, and it makes me not like the character, and I don't want to not like one of the main characters because they decide to be lazy in the character writing department. So, first entry in Let It Die. Now we have Anybody Home? And this one is lazy bullshit to me because, and this is another personal thing for me, this is where you have somebody in a horror film, and I used the picture from the original Texas Chainsaw, where they walk into somebody's house that they don't know, and they just start asking for, hey, anybody here? I know I'm a fucking prowler. I'm trespassing. You could literally legally shoot me in the face right now, but hey, anybody home? It's just such a dumbass thing. Like, maybe it worked better in the 70s and the 80s where maybe that was more commonplace, but I don't know anybody that does that. And it's such a thing for me where my dad raised me so strictly as a kid to always knock on the door, ring the doorbell, be invited in, do not walk into anybody's house ever, that even as a 34-year-old man, if I have a very close friend or I have family members that tell me, you don't have to knock, just walk in, I can't fucking do it. I cannot do it. I could be practically a member of that household. I still have to knock on the door or ring the doorbell and have you let me in. So that's just something for me where when I see it in the movie, it makes me cringe. I hate it. Now we got one of my favorite names. We got Bitches Be Trippin'. And this is when you have, usually it's like the big-breasted bimbo character that just trips over nothing. They're running away from the killer. They've got a hell of a lead on them, and they just stumble over thin fucking air. And, you know, it's been made fun of to death. I mean, between Scary Movie and Scream and everything else. So, you know, it's pretty lazy. You know, it can be entertaining when they're making fun of it, but if it happens in a movie, you're just like, oh my God, bitch, you deserve to die. You deserve to die now. So it's pretty stupid. You could find other ways to make the killer catch back up to them or outsmart them without having them be fucking moronic and falling over themselves. Now we have the black guy always dies. Or I guess you could say black character always dies. Now this actually started as a trope that I had titled Black Guy Dies First, but I had one of my Patreon members bring up a very good point that that's actually something that never really was a big trope. It was always just that the black character is not going to survive to the end of the film. It wasn't until movies started making fun of it that they started rephrasing it as the black guy dies first. And they were correct. So this is actually one, oh God, I don't... This is going to be problematic. I'm going to stick it in I'll tolerate it, but stop. Don't cancel me for this. Listen, hear me out. I'm not saying that I'm tolerating the black characters being treated as lesser characters in any way. The reason why I'll tolerate it is because I feel like since the 90s, actually predominantly in the 90s, it was a big thing that movies have actively subverted that trope and that cliche in an entertaining way. I mean, I could think of a multitude of movies specifically in the 90s, most of them starring LL Cool J, where they kind of make you think that the black character has died just for them to come back at the end in the third act and like save the day. Deep Blue Sea or H2O or something like that. So while this was absolutely something that was a big problem in older films like Night of the Living Dead, which is the picture that I use as a prime example of how they kind of teased you with that a little bit. Like they made you think, oh my God, the black guy's finally going to survive the movie just for him to get shot and laid on top of the pile and set on fire in the last 3 minutes of the movie. So this was something that was definitely because of prejudice and things like that in, I'd say everything before the 90s and maybe a few films since then. But I think in the last 20, 30 years, especially, that has kind of turned around to be kind of a way to subvert your expectations and kind of be entertaining with it. If you have examples that refute that in recent times, by all means, give me examples below. But that's why I'm going to stick it there in the middle. It was a problem. Nowadays, I feel like we've changed that a bit. But correct me if I'm wrong. Next, we have Call in an Expert, and this is usually in paranormal films or haunting films or possession films where the mom or the dad just can't figure out how to save the situation, and so they look in the yellow pages and they call up a paranormal expert or a house cleaning expert or something. And, this is another one that I'll tolerate it. There's better examples and there's worse examples, but I wouldn't know where the fuck to turn. If my house was being haunted, I wouldn't know where to find the local, cleansing expert or anything like that. So that's kind of where the unrealistic side of it, where you're definitely doing some movie script writing magic there. But sometimes it can be fun. Like you think of Poltergeist and you think of that character.
This house is clean.
Or, the priest and the exorcist. And that could be some of the more iconic parts of the film. So all depends on execution, but I can tolerate that one. Now we have caricature cast. And this prime example is like Cabin in the Woods, where they actually actively make fun of it, where you've got the dumb jock and you've got the stoner and you've got the nerdy guy and you've got the slutty cheerleader and you've got the innocent virgin. And this is another one that I'm going to stick in lazy bullshit. Now, movies like Cabin in the Woods have done very smart things with it, kind of poking fun of it and sending it up. And there's certain times where we can subvert those expectations, where you have the virgin get suddenly killed out of nowhere, or you have the big-breasted bimbo kind of rise up to be the final girl or something. There's ways where you can manipulate the way that it's become a cliche to subvert your expectations, much like with the black guy always dies thing. But you don't see that too often nowadays. Usually it's just lazy caricatures. So I'm going to put it in lazy bullshit. Car won't start. I fucking hate this one. Let it die. Let it die, especially in modern movies. Like, what the fuck? Okay, back in the day, maybe you're driving around a clunker, maybe you got some bad gas or something, maybe the fucking alternator or the starter's going out. Sure, you can explain it away. But so many times they use this where the car is functioning perfectly fine the whole movie until they're being chased, and suddenly it's fuck, full tank of gas, what the fuck? It's so stupid, and it's just so overused. So that one can die, absolutely. Another one that's going to go straight to let it die. We have the cat scare, one of the most ungodly overused form of jump scares. Where somebody goes to investigate a noise and then a fucking cat jumps out and then that jump scares the audience. It only worked well in Pet Sematary. That is the only movie where it worked well because the cat is actually the focus of the horror. It is the source of the horror. It's not just there to be some stupid fake out, but fake out jump scares in general, we're going to get more into that later on, but specifically the cat scare, enough of that. It's done. It's done to death. Let it die. Now we have crazy religion, and this is where you have the religious character in the movie. More times than not, usually it's portrayed as being someone who's a Christian, that they're always done so over the top that they inevitably look like a psychopath. And this, I think, is entirely going to depend on your relationship with religion itself. Now, I'm not a very religious person, but I am very close with a lot of people who are. A number of my best friends are very devout Christians. And so it does kind of offend me sometimes how, especially in even more so in modern movie making, how Christians more specifically are always portrayed as being psychos. Like the whole cliche, not really cliche, the whole stereotype of like the, blood red conservative, like that's what represents Christianity nowadays. I just really deject that a lot. So I'm going to stick this in lazy bullshit. It doesn't offend me on the level where I'm just like infuriated if it comes up, but more times than not, it just feels dumb. Like you can have somebody who's religious in a movie and not have them be like psycho level. Like you think the mom in Carrie, that's always the religious character nowadays, it seems. So that's one that I can do without personally. Now we got creepy dolls, and I might shock some people that this doesn't go all the way up to the top, but I'm going to put it in this could be fun because while I love my Chucky, most of what Chucky does, there's also a lot of bullshit. Like Annabelle, not a huge favorite of Annabelle. You got things like the clown and Poltergeist, which is really cool. You got a couple others in some like haunting house movies. I think that utilizing dolls to be creepy is very effective because inevitably older style dolls especially are very creepy. I stayed in my grandparents' house like over a decade ago, and they filled their basement of all places with a bunch of old porcelain dolls. And yeah, I ain't sleeping down there. I'm sorry. So even as a grown-ass man in the shadows, I'm like, that bitch is looking at me. That fucking head turned. Like, no. This bitch needs to go in the closet. So yeah, I like my creepy dolls. Some are done better than others, but I enjoyed that one. Right alongside creepy dolls, we have Creepy Kid. And this is another one that I think can be fun. You have like the Shining kids. You have the kid in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. More times nowadays, I feel like they kind of use it to subvert expectations. They bring a kid in who's creepy, and by the end of the movie, the kid is the only one who's kind of innocent. He's not actually like a source of the evil or anything like that. But you think like Children of the Corn and things like that. Like kids can be fucking creepy. And the reason why is because they're supposed to be unassuming. They're supposed to be innocent and not really that big of a threat. And, if they run at you, you can just fucking like drop kick them. You could punt them out of the way. But kids can get the drop on you, much like with, like Chucky, it'll just get you underneath the bed or something, cut that Achilles tendon like in Pet Sematary. Another great example. So yeah, I do like the creepy kid trope. I do like that one. Now we have one that is rubbing shoulders with that one. We have creepy kid drawings. And this is where you have in a movie where there's like a haunting or there's like a evil imaginary friend or there's a demonic possession or something that the parents don't really understand what's going on. They don't believe what's going on. And then they inevitably find like some crayon, excuse me. My kids always make fun of me how I say crayon. That's a northern thing. Crayon drawings that always have like stick figure family and then fucked up demon off to the left of it, or stick figure family with their heads cut off, or, the kid draws something that's like, oh, so there's some evil shit going on here. It's pretty lazy to me. I don't know any kid that draws like that doesn't make like a really fucking big deal out of it. Like, we'll get more into like useless parents later on. It's another trope I have in here, but your kids well. And when your kids are fucking scared about something or something's off, it's very apparent very quickly. If it takes me seeing a fucked up drawing to figure out something's going on with my kid, then I'm not a very good parent. So not a huge fan of that one. Now we have another one of my favorite ones called Creepy Old Fuck. And this is one like, it's a death goose. It's got a death goose. In the first two Friday the 13th films, you got the old gas station attendant trope from Cabin in the Woods. They used it in Wrong Turn. I think they even used it in The Descent Part 2. Always some creepy fucking redneck old guy that's sitting around that is like an omen. You know, he's always warning the kids somehow, knows some shit's about to go down, but they don't listen to him. This is one that I'll tolerate because I think more times than not, it's effective as like a little bad omen, like just something to give you an idea that, yeah, if you didn't realize you're walking into a horror movie, you know now. So that one I like. Creepy town. Now this can cover a lot of bases. This can cover, towns off the beaten path. This can cover things like Hostel. This can cover things like Wrong Turn. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could look at creepy town. And for me, that's why I'm going to stick it in This Could Be Fun. Because I think of examples, which I think I actually used the picture from it, like the House of Wax remake. That's a really fun example of a creepy town where the entire town is basically mannequins and it's all a setup. It's all like an attraction. So that's a really cool example. And also things like Hostel, where you're, or even any fish out of water scenario, where you are surrounded by creepy fucking people that all know that something's going on and you could tell something's off, but you're the outsider. Even Children of the Corn, another example, where everybody's in on it but you, and there's nowhere to turn. That can be really fucking terrifying. Like, that could be really unnerving. So I actually like that one. That one can be fun. Cursed Object. This is one that I'll tolerate. The reason why I'm not a massive fan of this one is because, which I get for the stylization of the movie, inevitably the creepy cursed object is always something that any normal person would not fuck with. Like, nobody's picking up the lament configuration and fucking with it. I'm sorry. You look at it and you're like, yeah, that thing's cursed as shit. It's just not going to happen. So it's one where it can be fun. It can be fun to make fun of it. They do it briefly in Cabin of the Woods. It's one of the things that somebody almost does, where they're all taking bets on what version of evil is going to come out. But most famously, I would say it's the box, the lament configuration from Hellraiser. And I've just never seen a cursed object in any horror film that convinces me that somebody would fuck with that thing. So the logic always gets in the way for me. Now we have the dark basement. And this is one that can go right into Let It Die for me. Because much like with Cursed Object, especially if it's a kid, which most of the time it is for some odd reason, that is going to be walking into the dark basement, that doesn't fucking happen. I'm sorry. It does not happen. I don't care. You could have the most brave, ballsy kid in the world. If the fucking light ain't coming on and the basement is just painted in black, you ain't going down there. Adults aren't going down there. Whatever is that, fuck it. I'll get it tomorrow. I don't care. I don't give a shit what it is. Most times it's the breaker box or something like that, which gives you the excuse of why it's black. I don't care. I'm not going down there. We're going to sit in fucking darkness until it's morning time, and then I'll take my ass down to the dark, creepy ass basement. So that's another one where the logic gets in the way for me. You open the door, all you see is blackness, and it's like, yeah, fuck that. Not going down there. I definitely hear something breathing. Now we have Double Tap. And this is one that infuriates me. And I'm calling it Double Tap, which might be confusing for some people because they're going to think it's like the reference to Zombieland is the thing that's going to come to mind for most. Double Tap for me is the trope where they don't finish off the killer, where they stab the killer or they shoot them once or they knock them off the stairs or whatever, especially if it's a human character. Like, it's not fucking Jason Voorhees or somebody or some kind of a monster. If it's a dude in a mask that is a living, breathing person and that you have knocked them out or you have wounded them and they're down for the count and you don't finish the fucking job. You don't double tap. You don't put another bullet in the head. You don't decapitate that motherfucker. You don't take the bat and beat their brains in. That drives me nuts. Now, you have to have it if you're going to have any moment in the movie where the protagonist gets one up on the killer, because otherwise the movie would be over right then and there. I get it. I think there's ways if you have multiple killers, like in the Scream franchise or something, where you could possibly get away with doing that and just be, oh, there's another killer. So even though you killed him and did what you're supposed to do, you're still fucked. There's ways to get around it, but it drives me nuts. Absolutely nuts. Like, I think it was It's a Wonderful Knife from last year, where they knocked the motherfucker out and he's at the bottom of the stairs. The knife is a full 4 feet away from his body, and they're tiptoeing around him not to wake him up. Bitch, stab that bitch in the throat. End it. Do what you're supposed to do. You kill me. You fucking kill me. Next, we have dream fake out, which is predominantly one that is utilized throughout most of the early Friday the 13th films, but this is where you have somebody that gets some kind of a scare in a dream, and then it cuts to them waking up. I think Halloween 2, Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 is another example where you get the whole hospital segment, and then she's about to get killed and she wakes up. This is lazy bullshit. Not a fan of that one. Now, I defend the version in Halloween 2, the Rob Zombie version, but that's reasons I don't need to get into here. I've talked about it ad nauseum, but more times than not, it's a really cheap way to get one more scare in without having any real ramifications on your main characters. So not a fan of that one. Now we have, the one of this list that probably infuriates me the most, and that is dumb characters, and I don't even need to waste time. It's going right into Let It Die. Now, again, I understand that sometimes you have to have your protagonist do some dumb shit to make the movie last a full length time. I get it. And I also acknowledge the fact that it's very easy to Monday morning quarterback characters in a horror film when you're not actually in that situation. If you're in a heightened situation and you're panicked and you're running around and there's chaos, it's very easy to do some dumb shit because your brain's not working right. Absolutely a fact. But there's a line. There's a line between doing it enough to where, okay, I buy it, I understand, it's not a big deal, and then crossing over that and just having characters do things that nobody with a fully functioning brain would do. And the Strangers franchise, to me, is a franchise that has literally just embodied that cliche, where every one of them, all three of them, are filled with the dumbest motherfuckers you will ever find on planet Earth. And when it crosses over that line too much, the problem is you no longer have the interest of the audience in the mortality of your protagonist, because now they have annoyed us. Now they have insulted intelligence. And it's like, okay, they deserve to die now. Like they've crossed the line. They're doing dumb shit now to where I actually am rooting for the masked killer. Good job. Now you're an asshole who's going to die a moron. So yeah, I'm not a fan of that one whatsoever. That's one that, oddly enough, people defend quite a bit too, because if I actually pull that out as a negative in one of my reviews, always at least 3 or 4 people are going to come in and be like, well, I mean, they're not the dumbest characters, or, well, the movie would be over. And it's like, I guess, but there's ways you can write around that by spending more than 5 minutes trying to figure out how to write your scenario. You don't have to have a person be a dumbass to make things work throughout your entire script. And if you do, it's not a very good script, in my opinion. Now we have the dying flashlight. We're going down a little hallway, or the power's out, or even in the dark basement, and they got a flashlight and they got to shake it and hit it because the thing just flickers the whole time. I'll tolerate this one because it's one where I feel like if they pay it off visually with a good scare, or at least just rising the tension a bit, it can be a cool little element to use. It's absolutely overused, and nowadays where we have our cell phone flashlights, it's not so much of an issue anymore. They don't flicker unless the battery's dying, and then you got a whole other problem on your hands. But the old school flashlight battery is not working very well. I don't know. You can do good things with it, so I'm not really offended by that one. Now we have found footage, which is actually a whole subgenre of horror, but it got so overused that I actually classify it as a cliche. And this is one that I'm going to stick in lazy bullshit. It's not quite Let It Die, because we have found ways to do interesting things with found footage, since that is not the predominant style of horror that is being made anymore. It's had its heyday in the late 2000s, maybe all the way up to like maybe 2015, 2016, something like that, where like all the January, February horror films were always some cheap little found footage thing. It was the way to make a cheap horror film before Blumhouse came around and showed everybody a whole new way to do it. And so while there are a couple good ones, while there are some that I do really enjoy, the vast majority of them I'm not a fan of. And I just feel like it was more so of a cliche of how to keep the budget down more than it was for an actual intended effect on the movie. Like making it found footage didn't make the movie or the story better or scarier or, seemingly more real or anything like that, at least in my opinion. So not one that I'm a huge fan of, but like I said, we're finding ways to get around that. Like Late Night for the Devil. Technically that's a found footage movie, but that's a very creative and different one. So I'll tolerate that one. Well, actually, no, I won't, because I put it in lazy bullshit, but I'll tolerate it more than the ones in Let It Die. Hiding under the bed. This is another one that I think is lazy bullshit. And this is where the logic gets in the way again, because who the fuck hides under their bed? Who has a bed that doesn't have a bunch of shit underneath it, first of all? Like, does anybody, like, raise your hands if you have a bed frame that actually has space for you to crawl your ass underneath it, that you do not have suitcases or shit like that underneath there. Anybody? I didn't think so. So there's one issue. Number two, if a killer's in my house, the last fucking place I'm hiding is under the bed, because if they find you, there's nowhere to go. If they open the closet, at least you can fucking knock them out with the door. You can run into them. You can do something. If they, open up the fucking curtains in your back there, you can knock them down. If you're under the bed, all you can do is scream at that point. They've got you. You can't go anywhere. You can't run. You can't crawl away fast enough. They could fucking stab you underneath it. They could stab you through the mattress like Freddy versus Jason. So that's one that's just dumb as shit. Usually it's kids, so you can explain it away with that. But even as kids are scared under their bed. Like, that's where the fucking monsters live. So, again, it doesn't make any sense. Stop doing that. Oh, boy. Now we got some dumb ones. I dropped the keys. We were almost in salvation. We were running to the car, but then my dumbass dropped the keys. This is another one that is lazy bullshit. See, I said it was going to be an interesting tier list because this one's very bottom heavy, where I usually try to make it more of a balance, but we do have some in here that I really like, so we'll get to more of those as we go on, I promise. But I dropped the keys, lazy bullshit. I mean, like, who the fuck drops their keys? If you're running away, you're going to grip that motherfucker like nothing is going to pull it away. So that's another stupid one. And we can very quickly go into the next one, which is I dropped the weapon. We were about to kill this bitch, and I dropped the knife. I dropped the gun. I dropped the machete. So now the killer has the weapon again. That one, you can let it die, because that one will piss me off even more than dropping the keys. Drop the keys, okay, fine. It's this big, your hands are sweaty, whatever. You can give me a reason that I can somewhat forgive you maybe if we get out of this situation. You drop the weapon, I'm picking the weapon up and using it on you. I'll be right back. This one, I'm going to stick in I'll tolerate it, but this is one that I don't really feel like has been used much post-Scream. This was one that was very commonplace in the 80s, and then Scream made fun of it, and because Scream made such an iconic joke out of it...
Never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'll be right back, because you won't be back.
I'm getting another beer. You want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back.
I don't know many horror films that have used it since in a way that's not ironic. So that's one that is kind of an archaic one. I don't even know if it's a cliche anymore. It's like a cliche of the past. So everything pre-Scream, I'll tolerate it. And I don't even think it exists past Scream. Now we have incompetent cops. And this is another one that I'll tolerate it. Now, this is one that gets tricky because sometimes cops or, people of authority in general not believing the protagonist can get very fucking annoying in a movie. But with cops, I think it's always interesting because the killer inevitably will turn the authority around on the cops. And so it's always kind of, it's potential fun to be had there with somebody who is the symbol of authority in a community that has a gun, that has a badge, that has Kevlar or whatever else, and the masked killer just sticks all that up their ass and makes mincemeat out of them. So that can be fun. It can also be very stupid. So we're going to stick it in the middle there. Inconsistent strength. Now, this is an interesting one because it can go both ways. You can have a killer where they're doing things as if they are this really fucking strong person, and then inevitably when the mask comes off, you're like, no, they could have never done that. Like the example of the picture that I used from Scream 5. People have said since the day that movie came out, there's no way that chick killed Dewey, and she's not that tall, and like you can call a lot of logic questions into there. But then there's the other side of it, which is having a killer that just makes fucking mincemeat out of the entire cast. Like there's just an unstoppable force. They're fucking ripping heads off, like without even gasping for a breath, without even like lifting a finger. They're just wiping out the entire cast until they get to the final act with the final girl or whoever the final character is. And then suddenly that character can damage them. That character can go to blows with them, or they're throwing them instead of ripping their arms off like they did everybody else. So this is one that I'm going to say I'll tolerate it, but it it's teetering on lazy bullshit. The reason why I'll tolerate it, especially if it's something like a whodunit, is that it's very difficult to be that consistent. If you want to have your killer do some cool shit to make them this imposing figure, like, oh my God, I've got to run from this dude or I'm going to be dead in seconds. It's hard to not always have like fucking John Cena or somebody like that be the killer at the end of it to make sense of it. You know what I mean? So it's one that you can definitely poke holes if you want to nitpick, or if it's, sometimes it's a legit issue where you're like, dude, that just makes no sense that killer was able to do that. Sometimes it is a legit problem, but more times than not, it's one that I can willingly forgive because you can't always have a giant bodybuilder be your killer at the end of it. Sometimes it's got to be a regular person that you're like, I don't know if they'd be strong enough for that, but I'll let it go for now. Now we have the Indian Burial Ground, which is one where you have Pet Sematary, you have Poltergeist, a number of others where the source of evil is because they built over an Indian burial ground, or they've disturbed an Indian burial ground. This is another one that I'll tolerate. It became a joke on The Simpsons. Once you're a joke on The Simpsons, people don't really do it anymore. And so it's been a very long time since I've seen a movie that has used the Indian burial ground aside from maybe the Poltergeist remake. So this is another one like I'll be right back. If you were doing this list in 1994, then it might be a little lower because it might be something that's more recent. This is one that's kind of a bit of an archaic one. And I love Pet Sematary, so I can't hate it too much. Now we have internet exposition. I have a number of these sources of exposition cliches on here. This is the first one that we've got to. This is where you have somebody in a horror film that they go on to like fucking Ask Jeeves or something, and they're like, they type in their town, creepy deaths, hauntings, and the first fucking thing that pops up is all the answers that they need. It's like some old news article, or it's the location of somebody to go talk to. They just get all the exposition that they need from a simple little Google search. And we all know that's a bunch of bullshit. So that's one that really started to be rampant when the internet started to really become a thing. We still see it somewhat nowadays, but that was kind of the new age version of one that we're going to get into here in a little bit. And it's lazy to me. Exposition's difficult because you always have to find a way that feels natural for characters to get that information rather than them just finding somebody, having somebody go on this big ass monologue, give them all the information that they need, and then the characters move on to the third act. So it is difficult. It is one that is hard to avoid in screenwriting, but that is one that always annoys me. It's like, okay, they did an internet search for 3 seconds and got all their answers. That never fucking happens. Now we have It's All in Your Head. And this is one that I'll actually tolerate depending on the movie. Now, the picture that I use is one that I will not tolerate. That's High Tension. That is a bad example of this. But you have a lot of variations of this. You have certain events of the movies are all in their head, or the killer's all in their head, or the person's actually the killer and the series of events we saw from our perspective is all in their head. It's a variation on the It Was All a Dream one, which we're going to get into next, but it's in more of a psychological way. And so there's versions of that if they do it well, if they set the breadcrumbs in the right spot throughout the movie and they pay it off and there's not too much of a logic issue in there, I can dig it if there's some kind of a way to pull the rug out from under me and make the events of the film be from like a unreliable narrator in some form. But it's one where there's a lot of bad examples too. So we're just going to stick it right there in the middle. It Was All a Dream. That can go right to hell. I fucking hate that. I can't think of one good example of a horror film where the twist at the end is that everything we have seen up to this point was just a nightmare. Even the really bad ending of a classic movie like A Nightmare on Elm Street, where they wake up and she's like, oh, it must have all been a dream. Let me go get in this Freddy colored car and, my blow up doll mom will get pulled through the fucking window here in 5 seconds. I can't think of one example. That's a good question for the comment section. If you can tell me one good example of a movie or a TV series or whatever, a mini series where the twist is it was all a dream and it was awesome, let me know the example down below, because I can't think of one. I can only think of examples where you get to the end and you're like, dude, fuck you. What a waste of my time. Ugh. Now we have one. This is actually one that's, I'm going to stick it up in I Need It. This is the first one up in I Need It, believe it or not. And it's Jock bullies. Now, as much as having the jock, whether he's dumb or a bully, is such an overused trope, an overused caricature in movies, specifically having the jocks be bullies to the protagonist and then they get their comeuppance. That is the caveat. They have to get their comeuppance at some point in the movie, whether it be through the killer or the protagonist getting some balls and doing it themselves. If you have jock bullies that get their comeuppance, I love seeing that. Now, I was not horribly bullied as a kid. I certainly had my share of it, but I cannot stand bullies. Just in general, I can't stand bullies. It's one of the reasons why I'm such a loudmouth when people are assholes in comment sections or on Twitter or whatever else, where a lot of people let things kind of, go off their back and just let it go. And I try to do that most of the times. If I see somebody being a fucking asshole bully, it's hard for me not to jump in and say something. So because I have such a strong aversion to bullies, I love seeing them get their comeuppance in movies. So that's one that I absolutely enjoy. Now we have jump scares, and this is probably going to be the most popular one that everybody is going to agree with for the most part. I'm going to stick it in lazy bullshit. It's not quite in let it die territory because there are legitimately some really good jump scares out there. And I do think that the art of a jump scare is a very important piece to the horror film DNA. It's when they get overused and or when they're lazy, shitty, cheap jump scares that we have a problem with it. It's not so much the jump scares themselves. And it's only because the vast majority of examples are cheap, lazy bullshit that I have stuck it in that category. Now, you have great ones like Exorcist 3 is always the one that I pull out there as a great example. But there's a number of them where if they set it up well, or if they subvert your expectations, or if they fake you out, like getting a startle out of you, that's a fun part of the horror movie experience. I do think it's easy, and I do think it's cheap if you overuse it. If that's the only version of scares that you have in your movie, it's a problem. But if you have a couple of them in there while also having some legitimately scary shit and you're exploring the art of horrifying people in other ways, it can be really fun. So that's one I wish wasn't such an overused bad trope, such an overused bad piece of horror filmmaking, but it's not quite in Let It Die for me because I think that there are some good ones. Now we have Just Die Already, and this is when, specifically more in slashers, where the killer, the source of evil, just keeps fucking coming. Doesn't matter how many times you've shot them, how many windows you've thrown them out of them, how many times you ran them over with your car, they just keep fucking coming. And this is one that I think more times than not is fun. Like, you have to have an unstoppable killer with really good slasher films in one way or another. Otherwise, the killer's not really that much of an imposing figure. And you don't want to have a killer where the protagonist just never do any damage to him, because then you hate the protagonist, because inevitably there's going to be some scenario where you can damage him. You could shoot him. You could throw a knife at him. You could trip him. You could do something. You don't just want to run from him the entire 90 minutes. So that's one that I do think is important. It's bordering on I need it, but sometimes it can be a little ridiculous where you're just like, Jesus Christ, this dude's a human. That's where it becomes a problem. When it's Jason Voorhees, when it's Michael Myers, we can tolerate it. When it's like random fucking dude like Ghostface, where it's like, okay, they were shot like 17 times. Like they're still coming. Okay. Now we have Just Keep Running. And this is going to make me sound like a hypocrite, because the movie that comes to mind when I think of this cliche is one of my all-time favorites, but this is one that I absolutely think is lazy bullshit. And Just Keep Running is where they are running away from the killer, and they don't just keep running. They hide, or they duck into a fucking abandoned building, or they duck behind trees, or they get into the first abandoned car that they find, or whatever it is. Like, you just fucking run. Just run until your lungs explode. The fucking killer is not going to follow you for 20 miles. Just keep moving and you'll be fine. And the example of the movie that is the worst at this is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. Jessica Biel, apparently she must have had a sprained fucking ankle, because her character won't run for more than a fifth of a mile without stopping. It doesn't matter. All throughout that movie, she stops at the meat plant. She stops at the trailer. She stops at, the woods and the house, whatever it is. She stops, and it's like, bitch, just keep running. They will get sick of fucking tracking you, and they will just call it off. They will just cut their losses. but they never just keep running. So that's one I'm not a big fan of. Next, we have Let's Split Up. And this is one that, I'll tolerate it. It's not one... It is one of the more famous ones. It's one that gets made fun of more times than not in movies. There's probably just as many examples of movies spoofing this cliche as ones that are actively using this cliche.
Now, wait a minute, hold up! How come every time some scurry shit happen that we need to stick together, you white people always say, let's split up?
But I think it can be interesting to just put different characters in different scenarios. Is it particularly realistic? Probably not, because most of us, if we get in a situation like this, we're just going to stick together. There's strength in numbers. Very rarely are we going to be like comfortable, like, okay, 3 of you go that way, 3 of you go that way, and 2 of you go that way. Not many people are going to be cool with that in reality, but it is one that I think is necessary to, it's necessary to get different characters in different peril, to match up characters, even if you're going to explore character dynamics. Having a group of 5 or 6 people together, you can get a bit of a group dynamic, but if you split people up, you get a pairing of 2 people or a pairing of 3 people, and there's a different flow, there's a different dynamic to their dialogue. And so that stuff interests me sometimes, where I can forgive it more times than not, as long as it's not really dumb. Now we have library exposition, and this is kind of the precursor to the internet exposition. This is where you have the horror films where, again, there's a haunting, there's killings, there's, a demonic presence, there's something. And so about 2/3 of the way through the film, the characters decide to take a break from all the scary shit and go to their local library and, go through books or go through news articles, and they inevitably find the answer in about 5 minutes. There's always an article that somehow they're able to go to despite having walls of articles, and it's like the exact answer that they need. It's the same hauntings, it's the same killers, it's a picture of somebody they got to go fucking talk to get more information. It's one that I can't think of many examples where it's like, oh, that was interesting. Usually it's just it's a cheap way to get the exposition out of the way. So I'm going to stick this one in the same category as the internet one in lazy bullshit. Now we have Love Blooms. And this is horror films where you have, despite all these horrific events and people dying and monsters and killers and blood and guts, that there is some kind of love that comes out of it. 2 of the protagonists have fallen in love. Traditionally, they're the ones that live to the end. And while it's sappy, while it's not particularly realistic, more specifically for the women out there, because I don't know many women that get turned on by death and dismemberment, but this one, I'm going to say this could be fun, because you kind of like to have some bit of hope by the end of it, or something like, it's a shame that, 18 people were just slaughtered, but something good happened by the end of it. They have love, and they'll probably be together forever. You have things like The Fly is the example of the picture that I used there with that did not turn out so well for those 2, but I don't mind it. It's sappy, it's weird, it's not realistic, but I don't know. Maybe I'm a hopeless romantic at heart. I don't mind it. Now we have the mirror scare, and just like the cat scare, this can go fuck itself. This is going right into Let It Die. We all know this one. It's always the medicine cabinet, right? Where they open it, they get their little Advil out of there, they fucking take the pill, they close it, and there's a ghost behind them, or there's a demon behind them, or something. And even when they don't pay off the scare, they usually rise the music up to fake you out. It's the most commonly used fake out jump scare next to the cat scare. I hate it. I can't think of any good examples. The only one that I could think of, which isn't really a mirror scare per se, is from the movie Mirrors with Amy Smart's character, where rips her jaw open and stuff. That's a good one, but that's not exactly a mirror scare. Everything else, they're always a bad example. They're always the worst examples of jump scares. Now we have moving into a creepy house. And this is another one that, despite it being very unrealistic, it goes up into this could be fun for me. You think Amityville Horror, you think Sinister, a number of others where whatever the situation, whether the dad's broke or the dad needs to get away from it all to focus on himself or to write his book or whatever the fuck it is, or they just got a really good deal on it because there was people dismembered in the top fucking floor. You have a family that moves into a house that just the front lawn, you look at it and you're like, yeah, motherfuckers died here. I'm probably not going to live through the night, but fuck it. We got a great rate. So this is one that's, again, Does it test logic? Yes. All of these do to some degree. Just depends on what annoys you personally. And for those of us that have tried to, especially here recently in the way the housing market has gone an absolute fucking ape shit, for those of us that have tried to find the perfect house, it's hard to pass up a good deal. So you get something like Amityville Horror where it's like, this is really affordable for a house that is like 5 times the size of a house that we actually need having 2 kids. But yeah, the caveat is that somebody was hung in the basement. I can tolerate that. It's one that's fun. And I like creepy houses. So again, more times than not, I can look past the silliness of it. Now we have no service, which is, the cell phones aren't working. And this is one that I'll tolerate. I have no issue with it because even though it is silly sometimes, it's just like the car not starting. It's always whenever the tension has risen that suddenly Verizon has shit the bed. But what I like about it is that it often gets rid of the cell phone problem. Horror in modern times actively has the problem of logically accounting for these. We have supercomputers with cameras and internet access and the ability to call for help in seconds anywhere around the world. And so that oftentimes will mess with the effectiveness of a horror scenario. Why don't you just pull out your cell phone? You'd be saved in 5 minutes. Well, if you throw out the no service thing, you get rid of that. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's as crazy as the car not starting because I have had plenty of times where I'm in a well-populated city and I use Verizon, the ones that are supposed to be the best. And I will not have a very good signal sometimes. Sometimes it's just spotty in one little area. I walk 20 feet to the right. All of a sudden there's a bar there. We've all had that experience. So that one is not nearly as annoying as the car one for me. And if it gets rid of the cell phone problem, I'll tolerate it. Now we have nobody carrying, which is, again, traditionally in slasher films where no matter what type of diverse cast you have, nobody's got a fucking gun. Nobody is carrying a weapon. Nobody has a knife. Nobody has pepper spray. Nothing. And this is one that I think nowadays especially is lazy bullshit. I think nowadays you need to start accounting for that. The same way with the cell phones. Either have somebody have their weapon taken from them or the guy with the weapon gets killed with it by the killer and the killer gets rid of something. But always everybody, no matter where they're at, no matter if it's their house, if it's at a fucking, a park, if they're out camping somewhere, nobody's got any form of weapon whatsoever. Gets a little convenient. Nobody believes the protagonist. There's something haunting us. There's something chasing us. There's something weird in the basement. I'm seeing demons at night. The fucking TV's flickering and voices are coming out of it. Oh, you're just crazy. You just had a nightmare. It's such an overused thing that I hate it. So this is one that you can let it die. I mean, again, it's difficult to get around sometimes, but there's ways that I feel like you can have more realistic conversations when it's just like somebody who is perfectly trustworthy up to that point comes to you and says this crazy shit is happening. And the character's first response is, you had a nightmare. You're having panic attacks or something. That would never happen. Who would do that? My wife's a perfectly sane person most of the time. And if she came to me and is like, there's fucking scratches like in the attic, like I'm hearing somebody scratch in the attic, like I'm not going to be like, no, there's not. I'm going to be like, well, give me a fucking flashlight, one that preferably works, and let me go investigate the attic. Which, I guess that would be me dying to a cliche right there, investigating the noise. We'll get to that one. But yeah, nobody believing the protagonist. Absolutely nobody. Always annoys me. You can have one dumbass character, but when nobody believes them, at that point, it's like, come on, guys. At least somewhat investigate what they're talking about. Now we have old footage exposition. Yet another variation of the library and the internet search where they find an old VHS tape or a film reel or something where somebody has filmed the answer to all of their questions. You think like Malignant, where Malignant, I think she finds like a VHS tape or something where they have the procedure and it just gives all the answers right there. This one, oddly enough, as stupid as it is, logically, to think that there's actually a tape still sitting around with all these answers, or that they would be able to find it, that it wouldn't be destroyed. They just happen to come across it. As stupid as that is, and I will not argue that, I like the aesthetic. I like the visual of finding a VHS tape or an old film reel or a Super 8 or something like that that has some scary shit on it. So that one I'm actually going to tolerate. That one is going to be up here and I'll tolerate it because just from a visual standpoint, just from a stylistic standpoint, I think it can be fun. Now we have one last scare, and this is similar to Just Die Already, the one that we talked about earlier that's up in This Could Be Fun, where the killer just keeps coming back, but this is more specifically like the very end of the movie. More times than not, the last shot, where the killer does one last jump scare to let you know that they're back and they're alive, and you can expect a sequel if we make enough money. And while, you know, it's one that more times than not can feel cheap because you get no explanation whatsoever for how the fuck they're still alive, especially if it's a human character. Like, I Know What You Did Last Summer is a good example, and both of the films, I think, did that, where, there's no logical reason why that character is still alive, but yet again, they jump out at the very end. But then if they follow it up and they explain it in the sequel, it's very easy to forgive, and it's a cool way to tease, that there's still some stories to be told. It's when they don't explain it that it annoys me, like in the I Know What You Did Last Summer franchise, where you watch I Still Know, there's no mention of that whole shower scene where he jumps out at her. If we do end up getting this legacy sequel with Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr., I guarantee there's not going to be any explanation of how Ben Willis grabs her from underneath the bed in their house months later. I don't know. This is a difficult one. This is one that I think can be okay, but I also think that there's some bad examples of it. So it really just depends on how they pay it off in the sequel. For now, I'm going to stick it in, I'll tolerate it, but the caveat is they have to explain it somehow in the sequel. Now we have pet warnings, and this is another one that for me is in lazy bullshit, because just like with having a sane person try to give you warnings and everybody's like, I don't know about that, you seem like you're a little crazy. Like, I have 2 dogs. I know how they are normally. If they're growling at a fucking closet, or if they're looking down in the basement and growling and shit like that, I ain't going in the fucking basement, because there is obviously something down there. Like, animals, especially dogs in movies, are very cognizant of things that are going on that humans cannot tell. Like, my dog can tell if somebody's in the driveway 50 feet away from where the fuck she is sitting, and she reacts every single time. So that's one in movies where people always just tie the dog up. Just put the dog outside. Fucking thing's acting weird. And then the dog ends up inevitably getting killed, which I also hate that. So that's the one that annoys me. Like, have dogs be more of a really cool presence in a slasher film, where like they use the dog, like, what room's he in? That one? Cool. Pow, 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 pow. Like, use it some way to make it realistic. Dogs are the shit. They're giving you warnings to keep you alive, motherfucker. Listen. Now we have premonition. And this is one that, unfortunately, I got to stick it in lazy bullshit, because the only franchise that I think it's utilized well in is Final Destination, which that's the entire premise, the whole setup of the movie, is that a premonition kicks the whole thing off and saves the characters that are now going to be killed off throughout the rest of the runtime. Any other movie, premonitions are like the worst version of exposition dump, where just for some unexplained reason, it all came to me in a fever dream. You think of like Jeepers Creepers 2, where random blonde cheerleader chick all throughout the film just sees these fucking visions of Justin Long. And it's like, can you stop to explain this at any point? Why the fuck is she a psychic all of a sudden? They just pull into this town, and all of a sudden she's clairvoyant. The fuck is that? So yeah, I can't think of any good examples. I struggled to, besides Final Destination movies that are good examples. And so I'm going to stick that in lazy bullshit, because you can forgive it in a film where that's the setup. Everything else, usually it comes out of nowhere and you have no explanation for it. Now we have red herring, which is the character that they try to direct your attention to and make you think that's the killer, just to later on reveal that it's somebody else. And this is one that it's one of the more classic screenwriting cliches and tropes that unfortunately nowadays has been subverted so many times that now it's lazy bullshit. Now, I mean, it's hard to have a whodunit without some form of red herring in there, so it's very difficult not to use that in some form. But I can't think of the last time that there was an effective red herring. usually it's so obvious that they're trying to direct your attention at this character that automatically you know that's not the killer. And I can't think of any movies that have really done something creative with that. And sometimes it's annoying. Sometimes where it's like, just because you directed me so harshly at this character, I looked at this character so much more, and now I know the twist of the film 15 minutes in. That's usually what ends up happening nowadays if they really overcommit to the red herring. So I'm not a massive fan of that one anymore. That one, more often than not, it kind of, I don't know, it usually sets me off to what the actual twist is, and then I get disappointed that I'm ahead of the movie. Now we have risky sex, and this is one where there's a killer out there. People are dying. There's impending doom. We don't know how much longer we have to live, but there's always time to fuck. So you got things like the Friday the 13th movies, or anything else where it's just like we will absolutely forgo any protection that we have or any actual real life response to this situation to get one last nut in. And it just, more often than not, it's just a way to get more tits and ass in a movie. And so I'll talk about this a little bit more later because there's another cliche that's going to kind of more formulate this. But this is one that, I think it can be fun. I'm not somebody that gets offended at pointless sex scenes and pointless nudity in movies. I'm just not. That's something that's become this big topic of debate nowadays, now that we're all conscious and we're so aware of how things are supposed to be more. Some things are legitimately, they need to be improved upon, and we're taking those correct steps. But this is one that has annoyed me, where on Twitter, there's such a trend now in movie discussion where it's like, what's the most pointless sex scene? Like Oppenheimer was a big one, where they're like, this is the most pointless nude and sex scene or whatever. And it's like, has any sex scene or nude scene ever really had like a serious point? That doesn't mean that it's like, it's wrong for being there, you fucking prude. But nonetheless, I think that it's usually funny. It usually entertains me. Think like Friday the 13th, 2009, the stupendous tits scene and everything, where it's just like, it's absolutely ridiculous that these characters are fucking right now, but whatever. God bless them. Get one more in before you get slaughtered. There's actually a deleted scene before I move on. I really wish they would have stuck back in the movie because I think it was brilliant. In the original Scary Movie, there is a scene that was deleted with Marlon Wayne's character, Shorty, where they make fun of this, where he's trying to fuck a chick, and she's like, isn't there a killer out there? So then they start having sex, and they're both pointing guns. So, like, he's fucking him pointing this way, and she's fucking him pointing that way, and, he's got her taking her from behind, and he's got both guns going. Like, that is hilarious, and it's a deleted scene. So whenever I think of this, I think of that. Just fun fact for you. If you've never seen the deleted scenes of that movie, that's a good one. Now we have running from car, and this is one that I also think is lazy bullshit. Now this is where you have somebody usually on a road, and there's a car chasing them, and they're just running in a straight line. Like they're ever going to outrun a fucking automobile instead of ducking into the woods or, juking them or refusing to run or whatever. Like anything that somebody with some sense would do, you just get some pointless tension scene where somebody behind a fucking engine is gaining on a human being and they're just running in a straight line. So that's one that's dumb. It's one that's not used nearly as often as some of these other ones, but it is one that I thought of that I'm like, yeah, that always annoys me when that comes up. Now we have running upstairs, and this is one that I'm not too harsh on. I'll tolerate this one. This is where they make fun of it in Scream, where Sydney's on the phone and she's like, it's always some big-breasted titty girl where she just runs up the stairs when she should be running out the front door just for 5 minutes later for her to do the same exact thing. That is one that I actually think is pretty realistic as far as a character making a dumb decision, because you're in panic mode. You go to the door, you jiggle the handle, it's locked. Even though all you gotta do is remove the chain or do whatever, like you panic, you just want to fucking get away, so you run to the stairs, thinking that you can lose them upstairs or lock the door or something. Like that's one that, I think more times than not, people in a real life situation, even if they think it's dumb as fuck when they see it in movies, would probably do that. So that one I'm not really too harsh on. This is a pretty classic one. Sex equals death.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex.
The virgin will survive, and anybody that fucks or anybody that has fucked before the movie starts, you are absolutely going to be a victim. And this is going to go right up next to risky sex. This is one that I always think is fun. It's always a fun trope. It's always fun to have the more slutty characters or the more promiscuous characters get like a not so subtle life lesson in the shape of, a machete or something like that. And then you have films like It Follows that does something really interesting with that and turns that into the basis of the horror and the haunting. So that one that I actually think is a classic for a reason, and I don't think it should go away anytime soon. Now we have Sharpshooter, and this is where you have characters that clearly have no gun training, that have no experience holding guns, but yet, and this is pretty traditional in like zombie movies or something where there's a lot of gunfire. Suddenly they're in a horror situation and they're just popping headshots left and right. And this is one that actually, as dumb as it is, I can tolerate it because specifically more with the zombie films, you don't want to have a movie where they're just missing left and right. Sometimes realism is boring. Sometimes reality is fucking boring. Have them be awesome at shooting guns because there's 200 zombies and we want to see 47 of them have their head explode and they run out of bullets. And, so that's one that, while dumb, I'm fine with. Now we're back. We have another one that I can stop being negative towards. We have Signature Weapon, and this absolutely goes up into I need it. This is Freddy Krueger's glove, Jason's machete, Michael Myers' kitchen knife, Leatherface's chainsaw, Pinhead's chains. Any really good, iconic villain, for the most part, has a signature weapon, has a weapon that is synonymous with their look, with their getup. And I love that. That's actually one of the more exciting things when you have attempts at like new horror icons or new slasher icons. Is not only like how are you going to design the killer, but what is going to be their method of pain? What is going to be their signature weapon? And so you think of like a really recent example, like In a Violent Nature. For all the problems that I have with that film, I think that the signature weapons that they give Johnny are pretty fucking cool because they're like firefighter themed and they're pretty wicked. So, the hooks with the chains. And so that's one that I always love. Some are more iconic than others, but that is one that I have always loved and always will love. Now we have Sound Gives Away Hiding Spot. And there's plenty of scenes like this where you're hiding in a closet, hiding under the fucking bed, hiding in an abandoned room, hiding up in the rafters, and then the cell phone rings or the watch beeps or whatever the fuck happens that gives away their location. Dumb as fuck. Like overused, dumb, lazy bullshit. Like, again, find other ways to put our characters back into the path of the killer besides random fucking Alexa alarms going off in the most inopportune time. You can get away with that once or twice, but whenever it comes to a point where it's a cliche, and it absolutely is, let's find other ways to do it, please. Now we have Survivor exposition. And I think this is the last one that I have that's on that theme. So this is where, and it's usually as a result of one of the previous three, where the characters have investigated what's going on and they've gone to a library or they've done a little Ask Jeeves search or they've, found a fucking old tape and it points them towards somebody that might have the answers. And inevitably they're always like some old fucking hermit. And so they go knock on the door and they have the little chain on the door. Like, what do you kids want? And it's like, hey, my fucking friends are dying because of this curse that it looks like you experienced back in 1984. Can you help us out? Nah, fuck y'all. And they shut the door. And then inevitably within 15 minutes, they're like, all right, I felt guilty. What do you need me to do? And then they die. As soon as they start to help the new generation of victims, they die. Always. So if it wasn't such a predictable series of events that is tied with this character, I would like it more. Because I think there's something cool about subverting the creepy old hermit and having them be the savior by the end of it. But inevitably, it's always that. It's always them not wanting to help and then reluctantly helping and then dying after they've been surviving for so long. So this is one that I'm not a big fan of. This is also lazy bullshit. I'm not a big fan of the exposition cliches. Can you tell? The only one that I like is because I like the look of old VHS shit, which is like the most fucking dumb reason to put it in I'll tolerate it, but fuck it, it's my list. I'm going to do it anyway. Now we have TNA. TNA. Tits and ass. Unexplained nudity. Random fucking boobies. Just for no reason whatsoever other than the movie's rated R and people like boobies. Sorry. Just a cliche guy. Can it be dumb? Sure. I'm a heterosexual male. I'm never going to complain about seeing it. That's just the long and short of it. So I get why some people think it's dumb. I get why some people think it's unnecessary. I get why it turns some people off. I get why there's logic issues sometimes. I get all of that, but I don't care. So whatever. It's going into this could be fun. Does that say something negative about me? Maybe, but that's just me being honest. So, it is what it is. Now we have the final girl, and this is another one that goes right up into I need it. The final girl is possibly the best trope of all. Having the badass bitch that comes through in the third act, usually the unassuming character too, which is kind of a cliche in and of itself. Having the badass bitch come through in the third act and give it to the killer and, take them down. And you have like so many examples of awesome final girls, whether it's the three that I have pictured here with Nancy or Laurie Strode or Sidney Prescott. I would throw Ripley in there. I would throw Sarah Connor in there. So many other great ones. And, the final girl is almost, if not just as iconic as the killer more times than not. That's how important the final girl is to the DNA of, more specifically, a slasher film. It's also one of the reasons why I get annoyed when you get people that are like, we need to have more representation of females in horror films. And it's like, this is the one fucking genre where we don't need your help. We've been doing this long before all the rest of you fuckers. Like action films and comedies and all that. Yeah, cool. You play catch up because horror films have been doing this shit since the 70s. Where the fuck have y'all been at? So that is one that the final girl is an absolute requirement. Now, sometimes you do have a final guy. Sometimes you do. You have Child's Play, you have a number of others. I actually did a top 10 final guys video that I'll put a link to up here if you want to check out. But they're few and far between compared to the final girl. But as many as we have had, I don't know anybody that is sick of the final girl. I don't know anybody who is like, I'm tired of having strong female characters go against the killer and usually come out victorious by the end of it. I'm sick of that. I'm not. Bring it on. Bring me more. Just as awesome as the killers more times than not. Now we have the killer teleports. And this is usually when you have the slow walking stalkers like Jason Voorhees in the later films, not the earlier ones, because he runs in the earlier ones, no matter what you Friday the 13th, 2009 revisionist history trolls like to think or not. The Michael Myers, characters like that, where they're always walking, they're always taking their time, and yet always miraculously, as soon as they get away from evil, they just fucking magically appear behind them and then stick a fucking knife right in their back. This is one that I don't mind. I'll say I'll tolerate it. It's not necessarily one that I think is like a good trope. It's not one that I could put in my two positive columns, but it's one that I don't really mind because if we're going to be realistic, and we want to have a killer that's a silent, slow stalker, they ain't never going to kill anybody because you just keep running and they're going to get fucking tired of chasing you and just give up. So having the killer teleport, having the killer, disappear into the fog and then show up behind them, that's just part of the DNA. That's part of the scares. It could be dumb sometimes. It could be overused sometimes. It can be predictable scares sometimes, but it is what it is. Now we have trauma reignited. And this is similar to the addict recovery one that we started this list with, where you have a character that usually about 15 minutes into the movie, they give some big exposition dump where they're detailing some traumatic event of their past. And inevitably, they're going to either have their trauma specifically reignited or they're going to get over that trauma finally through the events of the film, through this horrific situation. And this is another one that I think is pretty lazy. It's not really, I would say I'll tolerate it with the addict recovery, but because it's similar, but more often than not, it's just so on the nose. It's so on the nose that whatever happened to them in their past now is directly tied to this, even though there's totally separate events. So it's just very convenient. And the convenience gets in the way of my enjoyment more so than with something like an addict recovery scenario. So I'm going to stick it in there. Now we have based on a true story, and this is pretty self-explanatory. It's anytime you have a horror film that tries to convince its audience that this is somewhat real events. And I fucking hate this one. This can go back into Let It Die. It's been a while since we've been down here at Let It Die, but this one absolutely goes there. And it's because it has been so overused and so blatantly untrue 95% of the time that it has been used that nowadays when you stick based on a true story in front of the film, either on the poster or in white text before anything even starts, most people automatically assume this is all bullshit. That actually actively makes them disbelieve the based on the true story moniker. So it's never very effective at making the movie scarier. It's not like I believe what's going on. More times than not, I just get more skeptical. So I hate this one. I wish they would stop doing it. And, until there's actually true events, like until we're actually getting films based off of real true events, which more times than not just turns into documentary series, not fictional movies, I'm not going to stop disliking this one. So it is what it is. Let it die. Now we have Turn on a Light, and this is another one that drives me fucking insane. So we're sticking it and Let It Die. Sometimes there's a narrative explanation for this. The power goes out. The demonic entity can control the lights, something like that. If you put the effort in giving me a sensible reason why they can't turn on a fucking light, then fine, I'll tolerate it. But so many movies, predominantly one, and it's stuck in my memory from, I think it was just last year, The Boogeyman, where the monster can only attack you in the dark. And yet the characters that know that this fucking monster can only attack them in the dark won't turn on a fucking light. Those drive me nuts. And how many times in horror films, it's a haunted house or a creepy house, or they're investigating a noise, do they just walk around in the dark in their house? Yes, it's manipulated that way to make a scary scene, to make it more tension filled. Well, that's a bunch of overused bullshit, because there's plenty of horror films with haunted houses in the daylight that still get effective scares. Having them walk around without ever flipping that damn light switch on drives me nuts. Now we have twist ending. And while I want this to be the 4th addition to I Need It, there's a lot of bad twist endings. So I'm going to stick it in This Could Be Fun. Now, this is one that usually, I'd say 60% of the times, I enjoy on some level. It's luckily more times than not, there's something clever there. Even if they don't execute it in the best way, the fact that they tried to do something to subvert your expectations or pull the rug out from under you, I usually appreciate the effort. So I like most twist endings. And there's a number of the most celebrated endings in horror of all time that are, in fact, a twist ending. But there's also some bullshit. So if there was less bad twist endings, I feel like M. Night Shyamalan in general is kind of in charge for me not putting it in I Need It, because he has as many bad twists as he has good twists. And he in and of himself has created like the Shyamalan twist cliche. So I want to love it. I want to stick it up in that top tier and to be honest, just to have more things in I Need It besides the 3. But I'm going to stick it in This Could Be Fun, because it can be fun. Can also be some bullshit. Now we have Unoriginal Demons, and this is one that, again, I'm going to stick in Let It Die. And this is basically every demonic possession film post The Exorcist that is trying to do the exact same visual shit as The Exorcist. Now, I don't personally have the level of creativity to give you examples of things you can do with demonic possession that has not already been done, specifically by The Exorcist, but when you have a haunted film where there's some kind of possession and all they do is show somebody with scratches on their face and their body's contorting and the fucking head spins around, or they do the goddamn crab walk up the walls or whatever, it's so fucking overdone at this point that it really just disengages me with the movie. It makes me, in a subgenre that I'm already totally burnt out on and really don't need any more ever, it makes me automatically just this is another one of these fucking movies. Like, you couldn't think of anything else to do but the same shit that these movies have been doing since the 70s and never getting anywhere near as good or as effective as The Exorcist. So it's done enough where I actually consider that a cliche. When you have a possession or a demonic possession film and you know that as soon as you see it, you're like, oh, you saw The Exorcist once. Congratulations. Now we have Useless Husband / Parents. I wanted to combine them because basically I would be just repeating my thoughts if I did 2 different ones. So this is a kind of a variation of nobody believing the protagonist, but even more so where even after the horror has started, that they're just become useless characters and the protagonist still has to do everything by themselves. This is one that I'm also going to stick in lazy bullshit. This is, I used a picture from The Strangers because Scott Speedman's character is a very good example of that, where you have either a wife or the kids that knows there's something going on, and it usually starts with them not believing them, like, oh, you're crazy, or oh, you had a nightmare, or whatever it is, everything we discussed in Nobody Believes the Protagonist. But as soon as something happens that proves to them, oh, my wife or my kids actually know what the fuck is going on. There's some crazy shit here. We need to figure this out. And they get knocked unconscious, or, you know, they have to let the kids figure out how to get rid of the demon, like in It and things like that. So that's one that, you know, I just don't like. I don't like manipulating your script into making your characters stupid in any way, shape, or form just because you can't think of a better way to get from point A to point B. So again, this is a variation of a couple of ones we've already talked about, stupid characters and people not believing the protagonist, but more specifically, which is very much a trope, the useless husband, the useless parents that just can't fucking give the protagonist a break. And even when shit pops off, they're useless. So yeah, not a fan of those. We got 2 more. This has been what? I think we're coming up on an hour and a half now. It's gonna be a long video. What was that noise? So this is somebody going to investigate in the basement, down the hallway, outside, in the attic, whatever it is. There's a noise, and one person, usually the husband, goes off with a flashlight. Anybody out there? This isn't funny. Let me know if you're out there. Like, it's done so much. First of all, nobody says that. If you're going out to investigate a noise, nobody's talking to the fucking noise. You know, you might say, is anybody out there? Or, you know, anybody there? And then that's it. If nobody answers, you're fucking done. You're not going to sit there and talk to the open space. This is one that, you know, I'll tolerate it just because I know as a husband and as a father, that's what they expect you to do. How fucked up is that? You want to talk about gender roles? What kind of a fucked up card did we pull with that one, gentlemen? Where no matter what it is, if there's a serial killer, if there's a demon, if there's a haunting outside, we got to go check the shit out. Everybody else, remain safe. I got it. I'll be the sacrificial lamb. Oh, man. But anyway, yeah, I know how that is. Because if there was a noise outside, guess who'd be investigating it? I wouldn't be hanging out outside. I wouldn't be talking to the motherfucker, but I would absolutely be checking it out. So it is what it is. That one's, it's not cool enough to be fun, but it's one that doesn't bother me because it's very realistic. And finally, we end our 69 cliches and tropes with "you got a purty mouth." And this is the trope of anytime there are rednecks in a horror film, you always assume, and usually are correct, that they are cannibals or inbreds. And so this is one that I'm going to stick in lazy bullshit. I mean, it's kind of its own subgenre of horror, you know, the redneck horror, the backwoods horror, whatever. So it's not so much of a cliche as it is the setup for those films. But even in things like, you know, The Strangers Chapter 1 is a recent example. You get into this podunk town, and because they're rednecks, you feel like everybody's in on it. And it's kind of a variation of the religious person being crazy. It's like the redneck is always the weird person, always the killer in disguise. And it's just like, it's kind of overused at this point, where I wish more movies would subvert that expectation. Like the Wrong Turn remake, where they have the podunk townsfolk when they first get to this town, and they assume the worst of them. They assume all the typical stereotypical bullshit of them. And then by the end of the film, who comes to their rescue? The fucking rednecks. So if we have more movies that would subvert that expectation, it would go higher up the list because it wouldn't be as bad. But the fact that more times than not, it always ends up being the case, it's just kind of tired. You know, it's not surprising. It's not clever. It's not saying anything meaningful. So it is what it is for me. But that is it, guys. That is the tier list right there. I wish we had more at the top, but I have a feeling that when I start to get your guys' list, which again, the link will be down in the video description below, I think a lot of people are probably going to be even more negative than me, because most horror tropes and cliches really anger a lot of people. So maybe I'll be the forgiving one. But this is how I have them listed. Please let me know what you guys think about it, either in the comment section or by sending me your own tier list. And give me some more ideas down below in the comments as well for some other ideas for tier list videos, because these are always a lot of fun. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put a playlist up here of all of my tier list videos I've done so far. We got different franchise rankings and a whole bunch of different stuff. So if you like these, there's a multitude up there for you to check out. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.